Good morning, everyone. It's Elo. I hope that you're doing well. This morning, it's such a beautiful day. It's very still and quiet, and the sun is shining, and it's going to be warm for the first time in a while. It's feeling very spring-like and tranquil, and I thought, what better environment to do this little coloring video. So I have chosen this page out of this coloring book that features 3 rows of sort of topiaries. And I think that it complements pretty nicely with the picture that I colored for a Patreon tier video a couple months ago, which I have since framed and hung in my laundry room right by the back door of our house, which has a nice window that lets in a lot of really beautiful natural light. And I think that this picture hanging with that one will be really nice, and this is actually a pretty cool way to get yourself some cute laundry room or powder room art, something like that, is to get a nice coloring book. These pictures are actually quite detailed, and there are a lot of fine lines and very teeny shapes that need to be filled in. So actually the other picture that I colored, that was the first time that I had attempted something like this out of one of these adult coloring books, and it was surprisingly more time consuming and required more focus and precision than I had anticipated. So I'm excited to be doing it again and seeing what I can come up with. I will, if I haven't already, put up a picture of what my previous drawing turned out to look like, because I may repeat some themes or just keep those colors in mind when I'm creating this piece today, as I plan to sort of couple them. In our lineup of supplies here, I have our Prismacolor colored pencils, which I will read the names of once again. Here we go. Okay. So here we have black, dark brown, sienna brown, grass green, apple green, true blue, violet blue, violet, crimson red, orange, canary yellow, and white. I've also brought out a Crayola, just 12 pack, which has a similar color spread to the Prismacolors, and a pencil sharpener. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Today I wanted to center my discussion around grandparents. And I think that, or at least I hope, that I have a sort of range of knowledge to share. Because I think I have a lot of experience with the elderly, maybe more so than most. And I just have found the idea of getting old, I think as most people do, something very peculiar and interesting, if not horrifying. So I've had a sort of connection that has made me reflect upon and consider all of these relationships I've had with older people. So, first of all, I'm going to grab my favorite color, which is also the color of my nails, which is a nice violet color. And I see some small little flowers here in the brush that are heart-shaped. And since this is my favorite color, I'm going to color all of the little heart-shaped buds this nice violet color. So I think it's somewhat meaningful to note that I never really had particularly close relationships with my own grandparents. My mother's father passed away when my mother was 17. So obviously, I never even met my maternal grandfather. My maternal grandmother did, however, have a sort of friend. I really don't believe that they were romantic partners, but they were more like roommates. My grandmother was a very devout Catholic, and she was very charitable in a lot of ways, and generous, and liked to do right and provide as she could. And she had 7 children. And then who I came to call my grandpa, a man who lived with her in a separate room in the house and was sort of her companion / roommate. And, she didn't have a license, but he did, so he would do sort of the errands, and he actually kept a small garden to the side of their detached garage. And he would grow corn and watermelon and all sorts of delicious fruits and vegetables. And he is actually still alive, albeit very old, and he's a veteran. He's not in excellent health. He's actually been through quite a bit lately. But although he has a special place, certainly, in my life, even he never filled that expectation of a warm and loving grandparent who, gives you sound advice and bakes you cookies, and just that very idyllic sense of a grandparent that pervades throughout a lot of cultures, within America at least, and I'm sure elsewhere as well, in their own ways maybe. But when I moved to the southern region of the United States, it became even more apparent to me how little that had been my experience, because many of the families here are young, and it's very common for children to be very, very close with their grandparents. Their grandparents might actually be more of a parental figure to them than their own biological parent in some cases. And I'm just going to take this canary yellow and color in some of these little circular, puffy flowers here in the shrubs, or in the grasses below the shrubs, I suppose. So in this area, grandparents are just like as much of an expectation to be in the picture as a brother or sister. And my grandparents on my father's side, my grandmother was sort of in poor condition by the time I was able to have very vivid memories of her. And my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, and I do not see eye to eye on much of anything, certainly not morally, and in a lot of ways that really mattered to me. And there was a lot of good reason for how I felt and feel towards him. So there was not a real connection with him. I did try for many years, actually. I hand wrote letters to him as a teenager, and then into my 20s. And he was not very interested in discussing sort of family and anything really outside of like his cats and himself. So it was very difficult, even when I tried to make a connection, be it about something important to the world or anything. Our family history, stuff like that, asking him about himself. It was just very limited information that I would get back. So in a lot of ways, I felt like I had failed at being a grandchild in a way, because I didn't have that special connection with any of my parents, and really I don't have that connection with my actual parents either. But in this video, you know, family is so complex, and there's so much to talk about, and so many varying ideals, and it wouldn't do much justice to sort of jump around. So I'm really going to try to stick with just the grandparent sort of theme. But it's hard when you have other people in your life who have these really special and meaningful relationships with their grandparents, and you feel like yours, you know, don't really give two hoots about you, or when you try to connect with them, you know, it's just ineffective in that way. And that's, you know, just the reality is not everyone is that kind of person. And so not every grandparent is going to be that kind of grandparent, because one thing that I learned, which is going to kind of supply the opposing side to all of the sort of bummer type stuff that I just said, is that when I was 17, I got my first job. A girl in my economics class, whom I was friends with, got me a job where she worked, which was as a waitress in an old folks' home in the dining room. And this old folks' home was for the wealthy, which I didn't know when I went for the interview, but it was a very privileged community. In order to be a resident, you had to be worth $1 million, either in liquid asset or in a combination of your money and your real estate and other potential assets. So, like stocks and things like that. So this place was no joke, and being a server there was actually very difficult and intense, because these people really demanded a very high level of service, which is understandable considering how much money they paid for their apartments at this place, living there. So we had to be very well polished as servers, and we dealt with an incredible amount of pickiness, stubbornness, and all kinds of issues that just being old presents, which I think is really difficult for a lot of people to really grasp mentally if they haven't been exposed to the elderly population a lot. I think the first time that most people deal with the elderly in a really close capacity is when their own kin become elderly. And I think that that can be really hard and really traumatic depending on the state of the person in question. So not everyone ages the same, and I can very easily tell you that the best thing you can do for yourself, even if it's just a slow-paced walk around the block once a day, exercise is without a doubt the number one thing you can do to improve your health as an elderly adult. Every single resident who I knew, and I went on to serve at various old folks' homes for the next 7 years. So I've befriended and become the, fake grandchild of hundreds of old people, and I've suffered through losing hundreds of elderly people who had become my friends. And it's very eye-opening to watch people age and how differently that can happen. But easily, everyone who had some sort of routine to exercise in their life was in infinitely better health than those who did not. And I would also say, though, that that didn't necessitate that those people had it the easiest. I did see a lot of heartbreaking onsets of all kinds of issues that can present themselves as we get older, and that's not to scare anyone, because everyone's different, and I had a large sample size. It's not like one person that I met was inflicted with everything or a number of different ailments. Some people were, but many only had one or two, real serious things that could be attributed to their old age. So it's not like the process is terrible, growing old, but I still think that it makes a difference to have interaction with elderly people before you're really facing that yourself, with your own family. And this is one of those reasons why, if my only interaction with the elderly had been through the experience of my own blood relatives, my grandparents, I would really not have any clue, even today, what it's like to age and what it means to be an old person. And one of the biggest chunks of advice that I can give about the elderly is that they are just people, and not all of them are nice. I've met plenty of elderly people who were real jerks, really mean, vicious people. You don't just become serene and lovely when you hit a certain age. Some people never mature. It's just like the myth of this idea that, parents know everything and that parents are flawless. And obviously that's not the case. Plenty of parents try their best, and that's what matters. But they're people just like everyone else, and they have their own issues and things that they're working through too. So that's just the same for elderly people. They have their own issues that they are working through, and a lot of them are scared of, the changes that are happening with their body, scared because they see their friends, losing their sense of thought or their abilities to walk, talk, eat. It can be really scary to endure all of those changes by yourself. And a lot of these elderly people, their partner may have passed away. They may be a widow, or some of them are not in good marriages. You see these old people who have stuck it out together, and one might not be treating the other well. I've seen abuse, in certain situations as well. So it's not all good. And, oftentimes family members do not visit, except for maybe on holidays. So like our biggest holidays that we would actually see people's families come would be like Mother's Day and sometimes Easter, or Father's Day was never like a huge one because there were far fewer males in these places. Number one, because females tend to live longer, outlive their, partner, especially in the time frame that the people I was caring for and serving were in, because of the various wars that their partners had fought through. So I actually, saying that just made me remember this one resident who I knew at an old folks home I worked at in Virginia, and she was a complete firecracker. She was so spunky and feisty, and she loved her coffee. She had to drink so much coffee, and God forbid you ever let her cup run dry. You'd be in for it, because she would yell. She was not afraid to express her feelings, and she was 100 years old, I believe, at the time, and she was actually there for the bombing of Pearl Harbor, and that was just insane to be able to talk to her about that kind of stuff. She wasn't always perfectly lucid. And her favorite thing to yell, which became a catchphrase around my family after I told them the story of this woman, she would yell, "Hellfire!" She had a very sort of mid-Atlantic southern sort of accent, and she'd just get really upset and yell, "Hellfire!" whenever she was real mad. And that was definitely what you would hear if she ran out of coffee. But I would just say, you know, not that anyone's asking for my advice, but it's really fun to get to know the older generations, whether that's people in your actual family or strangers. Don't be afraid to treat elderly people like people, because they are hilarious most of the time. They will say things that you never would have expected them to say, because maybe you think someone's like really proper or conservative, and then you find out that they used to be like a groupie for some major band and used to do a lot of drugs, or, you know, follow so-and-so on tour. Or sometimes you think that someone's just a real curmudgeon type person, and they're always angry seeming, and there are plenty of residents who would really berate the servers and treat them poorly as if they were very stupid. And sometimes you get to know those people who you think are like a total jerk, and you find out that they can like crochet very beautifully or play Mozart by ear, or you learn that they've just lost their child, you know, who obviously no parent should ever have to bury their child. That's just unnatural and hurtful, and talking to them about those experiences can really help prepare you for you know, your own future and some of the hardships that your family might face, that you might face. You can learn from them how to be better, how to invest your money well, how to you know, decide who's important to keep in your life and who's not. And that's the kind of thing that I wanted from my own grandparents. But I think part of me just didn't know how. I was young and they were very old already. My family is not a young family. My mother was, as I said, one of 7, but she was actually the 6th child of 7. So her oldest sibling is like 10 or 12 or 14 or some odd years older than her. So obviously her parents were further along in their own age by the time she was born. And then to add to that, my parents had, I guess, trouble conceiving in some way, and my mother didn't get pregnant with my older brother until she was, I believe, in her mid-30s, finally having my youngest brother when she was like 42, which is, I mean, it's debated now whether or not that's on the old side because of advances in medicine, but in terms of what we've considered to be science for the past however many long years, which obviously I don't keep up on these things, so I could be misguided in saying this, but to the best of my knowledge, that's on the older end of, you know, fertility and just becoming pregnant. That's kind of late. So by the time I was of an age where I could actually have conversations and memories that were more meaningful than just faces, my grandparents were already, like scary looking. When you're a child and you see someone who's very wrinkly and, covered in any sort of sun marks or has any sort of skin abnormalities or, just anything like that, it can be a little intimidating and I would say scary because you are not used to seeing the human form like that, I guess. Like, it's just jarring to see the differences, I think. And I certainly wasn't exposed to enough old people in my daily life that I thought that was normal or, something that I could look at without like kind of cringing, because I'm just one of those people, and I don't know if that's even okay to say. And I think that that's part of my point, is that not having that exposure in my own family really made it hard for me to ever feel comfortable talking to older people, like at the store or something like that. I would always kind of avoid older people, like as if they were plagued or something. Like I couldn't talk to them because they wouldn't possibly like understand me. I almost had this silly notion based on like what you see in the movies, that old people just don't get young people and that they would never like curse or understand your angsty problems, and that is just so not the case. Like, old people are just like everyone else, and they've been through like 90% of whatever you think you're going through, and they often can understand in their own way and might provide some kind of information or perspective that you just hadn't thought of before. And in that way, I think that old people are like a serious gift to society that we really don't take enough interest in or put enough care into. There are plenty of old people who struggle to pay their bills or even end up, homeless because they're just sort of forgotten, or their families don't understand how difficult it is for them to provide for themselves, or some of them, slip into issues with dementia and Alzheimer's, and they don't even know it. Like, you can't know when that's happening to yourself. So if a family member isn't, checking in on their living conditions and keeping in touch frequently enough to tell what's happening with them, then they can really hurt themselves and decline into a terrible state. And I'm not trying to be depressing. I know that a lot of this might come off as a little bit depressing, but I'm just talking about it because it's reality, and you'd be damn surprised how many people ignore and just completely abandon their kinfolk, their elderly kinfolk. I will never forget how many old folks that I learned had family who lived in town, and they never came by to visit. And then they would show up on, a random holiday, and I would say, oh, it's so great that you guys could come see him or her, or whoever it was, and where'd you come from, like, was it far to get here, and stuff like that. And they would inform me that they lived, 10 minutes, 20 minutes away. And I'm like, how do you literally never come to see your family member, this person who, gave you your life and sits here all day and doesn't leave, and you never come visit them? I mean, it's really shocking to me. And I understand that not every family dynamic is a good one, but there's no way that many families were just broken to the point where visiting outside of the holidays was out of the question. I think that if you're in that bad of a way with your folks, you probably don't see them at all. Yes, I wasn't there for every waking moment of the elderly folks' lives, but going for a meal, whether it's breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever, was the real highlight to a lot of these people's day, because it was their chance to, get dressed up, and they would go socialize with the other members of their community and, flirt with the single men and sit with their friends, and, they all had their dinner dates with whomever they felt allegiant to. Because there are absolutely still cliques when you're old. I've seen it firsthand. And some people are really, really mean. Like I said, old doesn't mean infallible. It just means old. But even though I only saw them for this, event, albeit the big one, I still talked to them, often, and they would tell me. I mean, they would be so excited if someone was coming to visit them, a grandchild or a daughter, taking them out to lunch or something. Like, I knew everything that was going on with them, and they would talk to me about all kinds of stuff, their favorite TV shows and their families and, stories from their past. They would teach me different recipes and all kinds of stuff. I mean, old people are really cool. And not all of them, but a lot of them are just really cool. And they have so much to give. if you really let them. And again, not all of them. You know, some old people are probably just as dumb as they were when they were young. Not everyone is a gift to this world, but a lot of them are just cool, and they have so much information that you can't really get in a book, you know, like hearing their firsthand accounts of things that they've been through is just really cool. So I would say, number one, if you're trying to get to know an old person, it's a good idea to just treat them like a person and let them be themselves. You know, it's just the same with anyone else. If you are around your parents and you have strict parents, or if you don't have strict parents, maybe if you're around a teacher or a boss or a coworker, someone who influences you to put on a proper face, and speak proper and kind of just not really be your true self, then you're gonna not be your true self because you feel pressured by that outside source to be someone different. And I don't think it's any different, for older people. If you treat them like they're supposed to be some saint, then they might act that way and never be comfortable to tell you how they really feel. Another important thing to talk about is, getting help and when to get help for someone who's old. And, I understand that care is not cheap. And I understand that not everyone has the means or the energy or patience or physical space to take care of their parents. I think that we should always try, if that's, an option in any way. But if you have to provide external care, I think it's really important to know who you're working with and how they're treating that family member, because even in the places that I worked, I actually had to end up reporting someone, and they ended up getting fired for, elder mistreatment. And that stuff is like no joke either. And it's not always that everyone you meet is a bad person, but taking care of someone who is elderly and or somewhat disabled to a lot of daily functions of their own, that can be very frustrating. It can be difficult. Sometimes elderly people with dementia or Alzheimer's can get into really intense and violent behavior patterns very randomly or seemingly randomly, very abruptly. They can be hard to control and work with, and so it takes a very special kind of soul to want the best for the patient, regardless of skin color or religion or, you know, any other factor, including whether or not that person has spit on them or tried to hurt them physically, because that is unfortunately something that can happen in a state of panic. Someone might become violent. So it's important to make sure that if you're giving your kin over to someone else's care, that you are remaining still very active in that setup. And, you know, this responsibility certainly does not end there, and you should absolutely be untrusting of everyone, no matter how great they seem, because no one is going to have your parents or your aunties or your whomever's best interests at heart like you are. People are still people, and they're still flawed, and they still make mistakes. So that's important, I think, to remember. I can't decide where would be a good place to use orange in this picture, because I'm not a huge fan of orange and red coupled together. And I had already decided that I wanted to make this rosebush kind of topiary a very traditional sort of red with black tree stems and some brown leaves. And I was thinking of doing this pot maybe bright blue. But I was planning on doing the other topiaries in more of a hybrid, sort of unexpected, whimsical look. So I'm kind of thinking that over right now. I think maybe just a tiny shock to color in some of these final little buds in the grasses might be the right balance. So yeah, okay. So you might be curious about, you know, well, what do I do in the event that my parent or whomever is going through these kinds of things? And I think number one is to monitor and be sure about what you feel, but also trust your instincts. You know, sometimes I had residents that I could tell overnight that something was wrong the next day when I interacted with them. They were not the same that they had been the whole time I had known them. And obviously I didn't have the jurisdiction to diagnose anyone with anything, but I would always say a little something to the nurses that I would see, who I was, you know, cordial with from working there for so long. And I would tell them, you know, oh, Mrs. Smith or whoever so-and-so is a little weird today. I think you should maybe check them out. And obviously I can't know for sure if they ever did, but I can say that without a doubt, within the next, 2 weeks maximum, I would say, that person always ended up diagnosed with some sort of Alzheimer's or dementia onset. So I say that not to say that I'm amazing or something, but to say that I think it is 100% possible to detect that sort of thing kind of on your own. I feel like like if you know the person and you know who they are, then you know when this happens. You can just tell. And I think that it's okay to trust that instinct to a point, at least to let you know to get care if necessary. And dementia and Alzheimer's they're similar in some ways, but very different in other ways, in the way that they impact the sort of victim. But one thing is for certain, that it's really never a great idea to sort of shock the person out of their imagination. So oftentimes I would see when people would come visit their ailing relative, if the relative would start talking about a deceased family member or an event that happened, 20 years ago, or getting names confused, things like that, I would often see the family very quickly fight this and get aggressive with the patient, their relative, and say, no, I'm so and so, or no, that didn't happen, or that was so long ago, it's 2000 whatever, and you can imagine that if you are having a sort of hallucination, let's say, in a sense, or you're questioning your reality, or you think you're in one place and then someone suddenly and rudely tells you you're wrong, that can be very hurtful and very jarring. So I would say don't be alarmed in that way. Of course, be alarmed if your loved one starts talking about, events as if they happened today and they happened 10 years ago, or if they start confusing names or just things that should be very obvious to them, like they forget they're a part of their actual routine, their daily routine, then I would say certainly those are all clear signs to consider. But if they get into some monologue or they start talking to you about something like that, I would strongly encourage you to kind of go with it. Don't encourage it, but don't jump down their throat telling them that they're wrong, and it can be very startling. So I would say just find a nice sort of calm way to loop the conversation around and bring it to something more grounded. Get an idea of where they think they are and what they think is happening, so that you can ease them back to the moment. And of course, just be compassionate. because my whole point, you know, is old people are just people. So I'm pretty sad because I've been enjoying this, but both of my batteries here are dying, microphone and camera, because we've been going for a little over an hour here. And obviously I have not yet finished this drawing, so similarly to what I did with my last one for Patreon, I will finish this up and take a picture and provide a final visual at the end of this video to show you how it looks and maybe inspire you to do something similar. Even though coloring is kind of silly in a way, I really do find that it's nice to have a task and to complete it and to be happy with what you've created in some way. It's just a very sort of simple and refreshing pick-me-up. So I hope that you all enjoyed this video, and again, I apologize if the conversation seemed at all morbid, but I hope that you can take away more of what I was intending, which is just a positive spin of saying that it's easy to connect with older people, and you don't have to connect only with your own family member, old people. It's just as easy to talk to them at the store or, you know, get a job working with them. They're really fun most of the time, and just kind of waiting to have some entertainment and something to enjoy in their lives. So I would highly consider, if you're looking for something to enrich yourself, doing something, even if it's a volunteer thing, just going and hanging out with some elderly people at maybe one of your local old folks' homes or extended living communities, anything like that. It's fun. And we're all, you know, growing old together, so I think it's important that we learn how to support each other through that and figure out what you like about you know, those lifestyles, what you plan on for yourself and for your family members. And I think it's a good thing to just have something to, like, a plan for that period in your life and other people who are important to you when they get there as well. So yeah, I am going to finish up coloring this, and I can't wait to post this and work on some more videos this week. So I will hopefully see you in my next video.